Welcome to this explainer. Today we're setting off on an absolutely incredible journey through time, tracing the arc of one of human history's most fascinating civilizations. We're looking at the Vedic Age of ancient India. Together, we'll be tracing a monumental shift from a society focused intensely on physical, natural rituals to one that produced some of the most profound spiritual breakthroughs the world has ever seen. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're going to explore the origins of the Vedic Age, the four ancient Vedas, geography and iron, society and gods, and finally, the Upanishads. Section 1. Origins of the Vedic Age, tracing the roots of a civilization. So before we can even talk about their ideas, we need to trace the roots of this civilization. And right off the bat, we've got to clear up some major modern misconceptions regarding the very name these ancient people use for themselves. Aryan. Now, historical context here is absolutely vital. In classic Sanskrit, Arya simply meant a nobleman. The Indo-Iranian people of the Vedic period used this term strictly as a self-designation. It was an ethnic, religious, cultural, and linguistic label. Scholars emphatically point out that in ancient times, this had absolutely zero to do with modern racial ideologies. It literally just meant noble. And we can actually track the movement of these people from Iran to India through hard archaeological evidence. Take a look at this detail. It's an inscription from the 14th century BC found in Bagaz Koy, located in modern-day Turkey. What makes this inscription a total bombshell is that it explicitly mentions four Vedic gods: Indra, Varuna, Mitra, and Nasatyas. It's a literal stone trail showing the migration and spread of these cultural ideas across the ancient world. Section 2. The four ancient Vedas, the foundational scriptures of Indian literature. We know who they were, but what exactly did they write? Well, let's break down the four distinct Vedas and their core themes. First up is the Rigveda, the oldest of the bunch, which focuses heavily on God's grace and foundational hymns. Then we have the Yajurveda, which essentially serves as a manual for the sacrifice process and rituals. Next is the Samaveda, and this one is deeply tied to the Rigveda, but it turns those verses into lyrical, melodious music. Finally, there's the Atharvaveda, containing early knowledge of medicine, spells, and the physical world. Just a quick note, the first three, Rig, Yajur, and Sama, are collectively honored as the Veda triad. Now, to truly wrap our heads around the massive scale of these ancient texts, just look at this number, 10,552. That is the number of verses or mantras contained just within the Rigveda alone. The sprawling collection is organized into 10 sections called mandals, making it an incredibly rich, massive repository of early human thought. And the Rigveda is just packed with fascinating specifics. For instance, its entire ninth mandal is dedicated completely to Soma. It also gives us the very first mention of the four Varnas, the societal classes of priest, noble, commoner, and servant, which are described metaphorically as emerging from a primordial entity called Purusha. And actually, perhaps the most interesting part is that many of these ancient hymns were actively authored by women. These brilliant female scholars were known as Brahmavadini, with sage Lopamudra being a really prominent example. Moving right along to Section 3, Geography, Rivers, and Iron. Let's look at the physical world of the Vedic people. Having explored their texts, it's time we ground ourselves in the physical reality of this civilization. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the geography bridges the ancient past with the map we recognize today. The rivers mentioned in the Rigveda flow through regions we still know. The ancient Kuba is today's Kabul River in Afghanistan. The Shini is the Chenab, Parushni is the Ravi, and Shutudri is the Sutlej. When you map it out, it shows a vast, sprawling civilization stretching all the way from modern Afghanistan deep into the Indian subcontinent. But among all these waterways, two held supreme importance for completely different reasons. The Sindhu River was the most frequently mentioned. It was basically their economic lifeline, earning it the title Hiranyayi, meaning golden. But the Saraswati River, that one truly held their hearts. It was revered as the absolute most pious river, tenderly called Naditama, or the best of rivers. It perfectly highlights this beautiful duality between material survival and deep spiritual reverence. Alongside the rivers, the physical world was also changing technologically. Around 1300 BC, early tribal artisans began experimenting with iron smelting. But the real game changer sits right around 1000 BC. At an archaeological excavation site called Atranjakara, right on the banks of the Kali River, we find the earliest confirmed evidence of iron use. This transition into the Iron Age was absolutely crucial. It fundamentally transformed their agriculture, their tools, and paved the way for a massive expansion of their society. Which brings us to Section 4, Society, Sacrifice, and Gods, basically living and worshiping in the Vedic era. So, with iron tools in hand and settled along these great rivers, how did they actually live? Let's take a look at their daily society. To really understand this, look at a word still used in India today, gotra. Today, it means family lineage or clan, but I absolutely love this etymological hook. Originally, back in the Rigveda, it literally meant cow shelter or a herd of cows. It grounds this highly abstract concept of family kinship right in the everyday, dirt-under-the-fingernails reality of early pastoral life. I mean, your lineage was quite literally the people who shared your cow enclosure. Now, the crucial point here is how they viewed their place in the universe. It was governed by two intersecting concepts. First, you have Rit, which was the impersonal, universal principle of natural order. You know, the way the sun rises and the seasons change, all watched over by the god Varuna. Dharma, on the other hand, was deeply personal. It was the specific human duties and actions required to maintain that grand cosmic order. Do you see how that works? The personal actions directly impact the universal order. And the primary way they maintained this dharma in the early Vedic period was through yajna, or sacrifice. Their religion was deeply tied to the physical world, manifesting as the worship of nature's forces, like fire, water, and wind. Domestic sacrifices were just standard daily routines, while kings hosted grand, elaborate community festivals. The whole system was built on the belief that the gods of nature were pleased by these physical offerings. Finally, Section 5, Upanishads and Liberation. The profound shift from physical rituals to internal spirituality. But civilizations evolve, and the Vedic civilization was about to make a pivot that would quite literally change human philosophy forever. As their texts expanded, a massive divide occurred. The earlier sections, the Samhitas and Brahmanas, formed what's called the Karma Kanda, which was entirely focused on action, ritual, and physical sacrifice. But the later texts, the Aryans and the Upanishads, formed the Gyan Kanda, the knowledge section. And this brilliantly illustrates an explosive leap in human thought. They went from worrying about how to physically sacrifice to a fire to asking what the fire actually means on a deeper, spiritual level. The word Upanishad itself is just so intimate. It literally translates to pupils sit near the teacher to learn from him about the secret doctrine. It paints this beautiful picture of a quiet, focused transmission of wisdom. And actually, this wisdom wasn't restricted just to priests. Even Kshatriya kings, the warriors and rulers of society, like King Aswapati and King Janak, they were famous, highly learned teachers of these secret doctrines. To give you a little taste of this philosophy, take a look at the Kathopanishad. It's framed as a conversation between Yama, the terrifying lord of death, and Nachiketa, who is just a 12-year-old boy. This young kid literally leaves home in search of the meaning of death and what lies beyond it. It brings this immense, relatable emotional weight to dense philosophy, showing us a fundamentally human search for meaning. This incredibly deep thinking ultimately structured all of post-Vedic society into a masterful framework for living. A human life was essentially divided into 4 stages: the student, the householder, the forest dweller in retreat, and finally, the renunciate. And these perfectly mapped onto 4 overarching aims of life: duty, prosperity, pleasure, and lastly, moksha, ultimate liberation. The Upanishads radically declared that the continuous cycle of physical life and death is not the actual aim of the Atman, or the soul. The true goal is moksha, liberation from that cycle entirely. So we're left with a pretty provocative question. If our true self isn't the body, and it isn't the mind, but this eternal Atman, how exactly do we transcend our physical existence to achieve that ultimate liberation? That is the profound mystery the Vedic Age leaves us to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this sparked your curiosity to go dive even deeper.